make a couple of observations. One is that I think, more than ever, that the county has really surpassed my highest expectations in terms of the county's role in testing. And I want to really commend the staff for getting us in the direction that we needed to be in testing. And I recognize that we really are in need of partnering with other institutions to do their part if we're ever going to get our way out of this. And so I want to just make sure that by the time we come back on September 22nd, that the completed or updated health orders relative to testing will also be coming back to the board at that time. I think that's a question for you, James.
And we'll absolutely share that information with the board. It would be a health officer order, but yeah, we'll absolutely make sure the board has that information.
When do you anticipate that information becoming public?
I can't give you a specific time right now, specific date.
The reason I'm asking about the 22nd is I'm hoping that's the outside time.
Yes, I think we would share that hope.
Okay. James, what are you, running for office? Looking for a little more clarity, but maybe if as you get more clarity, if you could share that off agenda with the board would be great. The other thing I wanted to ask about, and I'm not sure if this is a question for Dr. Kamal, but it's about PPE. And we've gotten some questions from our clinics, and I saw a news report that is saying that the federal government is going to change a policy in terms of the purchase of PPE. And I wonder if you have any concerns about that, or if you feel like, do we need the federal government, or have we already been on our own?
Yes, I'm sorry. So the question was, is the federal government going to aid in purchase of PPE?
Yes.
Okay. We don't have any information about that. It may come through our Mohawks, and I will check with them. But as far as I know, there isn't any federal program. There was a one-time distribution of PPE to skilled nursing facilities that happened 2 months ago. But beyond that, I don't know of any specific program for clinics. Thank you.
And part of the reason I was curious about it is, like I said, there was a news feed that said there was going to be a change in policy. But if they were never helping us, I guess that policy doesn't get much worse. I guess unless they take it when we're buying it again, as they were doing a while back. Right. I want to make sure that as we're doing the outreach, the community outreach work, that if in fact we see a significant need for PPE, that is an item that is raised with the board by the 22nd, as we will have been doing quite a lot of outreach by then, and I'd be interested to know if that's a request that we're getting. And then two other issues that I just wanted to raise as it relates to the Promotora program in particular, and outreach and revenue that we're spending as part of the board's action to invest. I can't emphasize enough how much I want to reinforce something that Supervisor Cortese said, and that is that I'm very interested in understanding how we quantify the investments we're making in terms of the drop in cases, particularly given the numbers that we have in the Latino community, that the investment, we need to figure out a way to have the investment correlate with the drop in cases. And so part of that requires us to be able to quantify our interactions, meaning, are we giving away a certain amount of PPE or hand sanitizer? Are we getting people to test? Are we getting them to test regularly? Are we able to do education with entire families that we think are changing behaviors? I think that absent knowing that, what concerns me is that at some point we're going to have to make decisions about what we continue to invest in. And if we can't quantify these investments, it's going to negatively impact our ability to keep doing this work in the community. So for the Promotoris program in particular, that's of interest to me. What I would like to request is that the staff just off agenda explain how we can quantify that body of work. And I want to make the same comment as it relates to the Haluna contract, that any additional resources, which I think are really important, like I like the direction of the programs, but I want to make sure that we're adding, as we add people to our processes, that we're also adding benchmarks for success. And because if we need to choose them, if we need to change, we won't know if we're not quantifying the strategic investment, right? It's important to have language and cultural skills because we know that makes a big difference. I love the idea of them being embedded in organizations. I'd want to better understand what we see as the outcome of that. Are there any concerns about that perspective from staff?
We'll try to do the best we can. I'm not aware of any place where there's been a study that showed which interventions have the most effect on the number of cases, but we'll give it a try. It'll be challenging to spread it out, but worth a try.
I think, for example, Dr. Smith, what I'm looking at is that for the contact tracers, if the contact tracers that we're bringing on board are actually doing contact tracing, then I would imagine, and they have language capacity, for example, that we would have a higher rate of conversations with people. That would be an example to me if they're doing contact tracing. If we have more people doing the service navigation, because that's another thing I thought those numbers were interesting, how few people were asking for services. Based on the feedback that we're getting from the community, there's a disconnect between people who are telling my office or some other offices or nonprofits they haven't been able to get help from us versus the number of people who are asking for help. So in my mind, all of those activities need to be quantified so we can find out where we're missing the link. So I don't, and it's testing, but there may be other issues that you all say these are important for us to understand. And so.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about outcome specific. That's the way I understood Supervisor Cortese wanting to know how many reduced cases from particular interventions. But if you're talking about measuring contacts and outputs and requests, yeah, we can definitely do that.
And I appreciate the point that Dr. Cody raised, that we may not know what the intervention is, but what we do know is the high number of positive cases that we're getting tells us a lot about the fact that we have not done a good job, and or not just us, or folks don't have access to PPE, or they're not able to wash their hands multiple times during a day. I mean, I'm hoping that that we have enough interaction with the public that we're starting to understand that trend so we can most address it. And I thought Dr. Cody did a really nice job of at least helping us understand the clusters as much as we can understand them now. And that's really what I'm looking at, both with the Haluna contract, but also with the Promotoris investment we're making.
Got it.
Thank you. And then the last thing I want to ask the staff to think about, and I'd like a discussion to come back to the board at the September meeting or the October 6th meeting, the September 22nd or October 6th. And Dr. Smith and Drs. Cody and Fensterscheib, and James and Greta, this is really a question for you, is that I think we have to make a decision prior to budget about how we're going to handle the EOC relative to fire, COVID-19. I don't even want to say anything else that could happen. But how our organization stays in high alert without at some point acknowledging that we're going to be in this situation for an extended period of time, and whether or not we need to be rethinking what's in the EOC versus what's in the rest of the organization, and or is the EOC what's the most appropriate structure, I guess, for us long-term, given that we're going to be dealing with multiple emergencies, including fire, and that these events may be longer than we've seen in the past. And so I'm just interested in how you're thinking about the long-term operations of the organization. And I really think that that discussion should be had with the board prior to us going into the next phase of budget discussions.
We've been discussing this issue among a group of individuals. We've been changing around the scheduling and the locations of various parts of the EOC, and we'll certainly communicate with the board.
Yeah, and I think, Dr. Smith, could you say a little bit more about that? I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean.
Well, we're thinking about how we're going to repurpose some of the skill sets and some of the people that have been working in the EOC based on workload and needs. We've had a fully operational EOC. We can have a scaled down operation and still provide the services. So we're thinking about how we're going to do that so we can give people a rest and make sure that we're still getting the work done. So for example, in the EOC, we typically have allied partners, and the schools typically have somebody actually stationed in the EOC. After lots of discussion with them, it was decided it was better not to have them actually in the EOC, but to communicate directly with them in their own location. Same thing with cities. We're looking at what to do with fire. We've separated the skills, or I should say the duties in the EOC based on the two major emergencies. So part of the EOC is doing the fire response, part of it's doing the COVID response. We're looking at how many people we actually need physically in the building, and those kinds of things. So we'll be moving some people back to 70 West Heading. We'll be moving some people back to public health. We'll be moving some of the disaster services workers back to their regular work.
I thought, and I appreciate that, I thought Dr. Garcia's point about, the placement of some of the workers that are really primarily community focused made a lot of sense. And I hear what you're saying as well. And I am also interested in understanding how we designate an EOC and whether or not that has implications for what we'll get paid back from FEMA as well, which is what I hoped part of the discussion would include the budget as well.
Yeah, as long as we've got a locally declared emergency, and the state and feds have declared an emergency, we're eligible. So the way that we structure the EOC is up to us as long as we follow the state rules. The state has a whole section of state code that denominates how EOCs are supposed to work and how the NIMS and SIMS responsibilities are sectioned off. And so we obviously have to obey those rules. But as long as we're doing that and there's a state of emergency, we're eligible for reimbursement.
Oh,
But
that's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Go ahead, Dr. Smith.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the biggest problem with the FEMA reimbursement is, as Supervisor Ellenberg said, timing is a challenge because the feds are notorious in paying you late and challenging everything that you claim, which is why we've had an outside expert who's had lots of experience with FEMA. We presume that similar things will happen with the CARES Act money or the HEROES funding, but so far that's not happened. But we're still keeping track of all of the expenditures. So whether we have a cash flow problem or not in the future is still in question, but unlikely, I think, at this point.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. And I want to say I agree with Mike Wasserman. Thanks to all the staff. This is a tremendous, tremendous effort and really great work. So thank you all very much. We're going to move on. I don't think we need to take a vote on that. I think that was a presentation and you got a lot of questions, but you always respond to them. So I'm going to move on to item 23. This is our wildland fire preparedness planning report. I just want to share with my colleagues the reason that I had asked at our last meeting that this be put on the agenda is that when this came to us last time, we had a very crowded meeting and the staff gave a very truncated presentation. But what I was hoping today was to have the staff review the report, but as part of reviewing the report, update us as to what investments had already been made. This is not an action item per se. This is really an information item just to help the board understand the situation that we're in today, but also the implications of it. And again, this is something I wanted to hear prior to two other items coming before us. That was the budget and also two audits that are working their way through committee. So we wanted to hear this today so we wouldn't have to cram it all on one agenda on the 22nd or October 6th. So with that, I'm going to turn this over, I think, to Chief Bowden and to Gary Hersig.
Hi, good afternoon, President Chavez and members of the board. It's great to be here. Dr. Smith, did you want to start off or did you want me to start off? I'll take that as me starting off.
Okay.
Okay. I'll start with just a brief review of where we're at, President Chavez, and then go into, as you requested, what we've done since the report, which was delivered to the board, I believe, last April 2019. So as we stated in the report, it is clear that we continue to see unprecedented fire behavior and destruction and really do need to continue to take action to reduce our risk and ensure that Santa Clara County can respond more effectively. Sadly, we've now experienced the second largest fire in our state's history here in Santa Clara County. And as I was reading today through the CAL FIRE report, this is the second amount of acreage burned in the state of California for an entire fire season. So two very large marks that we don't want to hit. During these last fires, we saw the quick depletion of firefighting resources and the vast destruction of homes and lands during the SCU fire and the CZU fire. And to summarize, which again, a lot of this was discussed in the report, the state quickly became stripped of firefighting resources. When the multiple fires occurred in the state, we were largely on our own, as a lot of local government entities were. Given the last several fire seasons, it's clear, and again, this is a reiteration of the report, that we do not have adequate wildland firefighting resources locally. But this year, I am proud to say that County Fire has played a very important role in providing additional wildland fire responses and support to both San Jose, South Santa Clara County, as well as statewide. We do need to continue to focus on regionalized solutions within the county to create more efficient use and distribution of resources. And then lastly, interface fires continue to be a local problem. If we continue to over-rely on the state for firefighting resources, we will continue to repeat this cycle. And the toll on our communities and the firefighters, it is great. And we are seeing that toll. So please keep in mind that everything County Fire does is based on a regional approach to service delivery to provide each community that we serve more than the individual communities can provide on their own, such as the ability to provide up to a 3-alarm wildland fire response, a 3-alarm structure response, type 1 hazardous materials team, etc. You know, for example, during the high fire days that we saw in August, County Fire will respond a high dispatch, sending 4 type 1 engines, 2 wildland engines, 2 chief officers, which is essentially 20 firefighters on the initial dispatch. None of the communities we serve could provide that level of service on their own individually. This is important because we can't always rely on the state for resources as we've seen. So that approach is key. Now, getting into what has Central Fire Protection District, County Fire, done since the report back, the wildland fire report back to the board that recognized the need for a unified program within the county to address the issues. And I am very proud to say that Santa Clara County Fire has contributed a lot to the system. Over the last several years, County Fire has built up our wildland fire response units and now has the largest amount of local government wildland fire response units within the county of Santa Clara. This includes 6 type 3 wildland fire engines, 3 type 6 wildland fire engines, a water tender, and as of last month, County Fire received a new OES incident support unit. There's only 6 of these in the state of California, and Santa Clara County is the proud steward of Region 2's Incident Command Unit, and these are available for use locally. These investments alone, just in vehicles for County Fire, represent over $4 million in capital investments over the last several years to build up response and operational capability. And we spread those out. We put 2 of those wildland engines in Los Altos Hills, 2 in Cupertino, several in Los Gatos, and then Saratoga and Campbell. And that's to ensure there's that regional coverage within our system. We just completed a full standards of cover, which is a risk assessment for the district. And we are currently updating Central Fire Protection District's CWPP annexes to ensure they are in alignment with the current risk assessment. These will be coming to the board before the end of this year for adoption for the district. We've engaged in a technology sprint, and this is one of the areas that I called out in the wildland report. And quite frankly, County Fire was not alone on this, with a lot of support from OEM and support from the county executive's office to engage and seek grant funding. We were able to apply for and receive several grants that benefit, from a technology perspective, the entire county of Santa Clara. The first was a grant that we applied for and received for the regional deployment of Intera, which is our GIS-based situational awareness analytic tool. And this will be available to every fire agency, every emergency EOC, law enforcement in the entire county of Santa Clara. We were able to receive grant funding for that, and we'll be working on the implementation this year. County Fire is a leader and early adopter of this technology, and this is one of 2 platforms that the state recognizes to be used to increase situational awareness statewide. So we're excited about that. Additionally, County Fire applied for and received grant funding for the regional deployment of Zone Haven. Now, Zone Haven, you're probably familiar with it, but you don't really know it yet. Zone Haven is a county-wide evacuation zone mapping tool that will build consistency through the entire county with a public-facing portal. This is used by several counties around us, and this will be available to every jurisdiction in the county grant funded. This product will standardize and streamline evacuation warnings and notifications. And this is one of the areas for me that was really critical on a technology perspective to really focus on trying to get those grant dollars because early warning of our citizens is critical, and getting the correct information out is critical. So OEM was a huge part in that, and we really appreciate their support. And then on the technology, we also have the camera system that I talked about. We actually have, we're shooting for 10. We have 13 camera systems installed so far in the county. We do have more planned. Director Plamondon over at County Communications and her team were absolutely critical in getting those resources in and being able to leverage existing repeater sites to install those cameras, and they have been used ever since they were put in. And we do expect more coming online. And then lastly, on the technology front, as you know, the Moses units, where County Fire was able to secure state dollars, $4 million for this communication technology due to the extraordinary efforts of Assemblymember Evan Lowe and Senator Bob Hertzberg. County Fire towards this project contributed over $400,000 to complete the project for this technology. And again, this builds in communication gaps and redundancy within our emergency communication system. And then the last couple things that we have done since the 2019 report is County Fire internally did some realignment, and we moved around some existing staff positions to utilize an existing battalion chief level position for a wildland fire program manager. As you recall from the report, that is essentially the program manager for the wildland fire program. It was critical for us to at least start there, see what we can do to move staffing around, and we expect to recruit for that position during the fourth quarter of this year. That position is funded in our current budget. Because again, it's an existing position that's being reallocated. And then our community risk reduction, which is another thing called out in the report, we increased our community risk reduction program with a strong focus on increasing community education programs about wildfire preparedness. And we've hosted several wildfire workshops, dozens, within the communities we serve and actually all over the county. And then for the future, we are going to continue to focus on our wildland fire program. Of course, due to the economic impacts of COVID-19, County Fire needs to continue to look at areas where we can continue to build our program that fits within the constraints of our budget. It's our intent to build out the pre-fire management program and continue to leverage those existing partnerships that we have with our local and state stakeholders, such as CAL FIRE and Santa Clara County Fire Safe Council, which does an amazing job in our county. And then lastly, we are looking at ordinances in regards to defensible space around structures to see how we can improve local ordinances for our homes to make them more hardened should a fire come through. So quite a lot has been going on in County Fire since the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the report or what we are doing in preparation for to build our wildland fire program.
Thank you. I'm going to go to my colleagues for comments and questions. I just had one issue that I wanted to raise before my colleagues began with their questions, and that is as part of the packet today, I just want to make sure that everybody has the wildland fire program work plan, program costs, and progress update as part of their packet. Is that the case, Chief? Did everybody get that?
Yes, I believe it was added to the agenda.
Thank you. And then what I want to make sure I understand is that as part of just this particular document, that the list of needs here is not fully funded because it's your belief that the fire district doesn't have all the resources it needs to fund those?
Well, I think it's twofold. One, Central Fire District doesn't serve the entire county. We're a small piece. In fact, the district, just the district itself, is the cities of the town of Los Gatos, Montecito, part of Saratoga, and Cupertino, and then the rest are contract cities, which is Los Altos Hills, Los Altos Campbell, and then we contract for service for the other half of Saratoga with the Saratoga Fire District. So within our fire district, we are funding as much as we can towards this program, understanding that we are constrained in where we can utilize district funds outside of our fire district.
May I ask if that was the reason that the recommendation that came from you was to consider the wildland fire program under the county fire marshal's office?
That's correct. The county fire marshal's office is actually, technically, it's still a county department under county ordinance code A33, and which details the county fire marshal and the office and roles and responsibility. County Fire, Central Fire District was contracted post Prop 13 to take over the majority of those duties in that office back in the early 80s. And we have been serving that via contract. But the county fire marshal, to your question, Supervisor Chavez, is really given the current state of the multiple fire agencies in this county, that is really the only office that has jurisdictional authority, specifically when you're looking at prevention and enforcement in all the unincorporated areas in Santa Clara County.
Thank you. And I apologize, I usually let my colleagues jump in, but I wanted to make sure everybody had the same document and was operating with the same background information. I'll now turn to Supervisor Cortese.
Thanks, President Chavez. So, Chief, I've had the opportunity to talk to you a few times, trying to respect your busy schedule over the last couple of weeks, given that the majority of the SCU fire occurred in my district, the one you're describing as the second largest in the state. And I had the opportunity to, on Sunday, to be allowed a 3-hour window to go up is just a little bit past Lake Observatory and back, so I could get a visual of the damage. Obviously, there's still folks up there. There are people who were essentially trapped because of the lack of ingress and egress, way back in, who are still struggling for ingress and egress. And I want to ask a specific question in terms of risk up there going forward. As comprehensive as that fire, SCU fire, looks when you look at a map, looking at it visually Sunday from a couple vantage points that I took advantage of, it's clear that essentially because of the strategy that was employed to keep the fire from moving west into the foothills, into the Elm Rock Canyon, into the residential areas above the San Jose Country Club, into the village's retirement community, into the hills above Evergreen in general, the East Hills. There's still a lot of heavy fire fuel left up there, just as I think you know where it is, so I'm not going to try to describe it in detail and bore everybody, but just on the other side of the ridge that's closest to us along that range, how much of a risk is that going forward? I want to point that out here as we look at how do we deal with this proposal of yours going forward, wildfire risk and response. Do we fund it? Do we not? It seemed to me looking up there that it would be a mistake for people to think, well, it all burned, so what's the worst that can happen next? It looks to me like it didn't all burn, and that's really the nature of my question. Can you speak to that? How much risk is there over the next couple months if we have another round of lightning, which we sometimes do get in September in this area? or just, arson or the usual negligence that causes fires?
That's a good question. I appreciate it. There is a significant amount of risk, and I need to address it a couple ways. Number one is if we get any measurable rain next year, you're going to see a very large bumper crop of grass out in the San Antonio Valley. Fire is, good for the ecology in a lot of ways. And when you get fire that comes through, you get a lot of new growth, especially when you have in those grazing lands and you have some measurable rain. So, and grass tends to be a significant problem when you're talking about how fast a fire can progress with those light flashy fuels. But it did not burn into the Alum Rock area. I think the incident management team did a good job keeping it away from the local response areas and keeping it away from the houses on that side, but there's still quite a bit of fire risk on that side of the hill. And then understand that I was looking at the map the other day because I spent quite a bit of time in base camp at the CZU complex and looking at the SCU fire. That burned over 50 miles. And think about that length, that 50 miles, and now put it where the Lexington fire burned. That's a fire from South County all the way up into Los Altos. And we have not had measurable fire come into the west side of this county for some years. So the fuel you're seeing on the east side, yes, it continues to be the problem, Supervisor, but you have similar conditions with heavier timber and a heck of a lot more homes on the whole west side of this county, from South County all the way up into Palo Alto. So there is a significant risk. We're very, very concerned that the CZU fire would bump up against Skyline. It didn't. We were very fortunate. The weather cooperated towards the end. But that remains in two areas that have significant fire threat.
Yeah, just following up on that, I have three questions altogether, but following up on that, and let me do this as a compliment, and please pass it on to CAL FIRE. With all the, aside from the complaints, legitimate concerns about ingress and egress and communications and fluctuating boundaries around evacuation areas, which are all things I suspect would be improved with a more consolidated approach. When I went up with the captain who was the PIO that brought me up Sunday to look around, he indicated that the difference that there was already a strategic decision that you could not evacuate, for example, the village's retirement community, just as a matter of logistical concern. A lot of elderly people, a lot of people on in medical conditions that don't allow them to move easily, a lot of people in general in a fairly compact area right up against the hills. And he basically said, as well as that turned out to be managed and the strategy worked, a shift in wind when SCU was coming through that backcountry from one direction to the other would have changed everything. The fire would have easily come over the ridge. So I appreciate by all means the vulnerability of Los Gatos and even Cupertino and Saratoga and all of those areas. We were praying for everyone and hoping for the best, and we saw the resources go over there for good reason. But just so that, again, I don't want to get too much into the detail here today, but I want to share a little bit so my colleagues who aren't as familiar with the East Valley side and the rural interface between the East Valley and some of those pretty dense neighborhoods understand that one evening with a wind that shifted, instead of going 20 miles an hour southeast like it was, had it been going 20 miles an hour south, northwest or southwest, it would have been a real catastrophic situation for people on this side as well. Back to the practical side of what you're proposing here today, how, certainly there's communication issues in these fires. You see that, CAL FIRE, especially as stretched as they were this time, doesn't necessarily have the local administrative support to really understand which street is the right street to establish a boundary and which isn't, just little things like that that turn out to be very important when you're in an exigent circumstance. How does the fire marshal coming in, if we ultimately approve something like this, how does it help with that piece of it, or does it? I mean, you said that's the only office that can sort of assert jurisdiction over everything, but it seems to me you still have, some jurisdictional issues between CAL FIRE itself and Central Fire District or the fire marshal. You would still seemingly have some communication issues that would be challenging between CHP, for example, and sheriff's office or local municipal policing agencies that we're all trying to figure out who's on first. How does it help with that again, or does it?
So I think there's two separate and distinct issues there. And so if you think of the fire marshal side of the house, think about the preventative mitigation side of the house, code enforcement, ensuring, like for one example I put in the report, having ownership of the CWPP and really having that identifying that works very closely with our local groups, such as the Santa Clara County Fire Safety Council, to leverage all those resources on the prevention and mitigation of risk. You're not going to prevent fires, but you can reduce the intensity through things such as mitigation efforts, such as saving fuel breaks and pre-fire, plan re-inducing fire back in as a prescriptive measure. Those are things that would sit on the fire marshal side of the house. And then you have the operational side of the house, where I think you're touching on a little bit there, supervisors, operationally, how do we respond together? And I think it's a critical point because I'm not sure that it's fully recognized how thin the county was on resources. Chief Hess from CAL FIRE and I have an absolute wonderful relationship. And that relationship means that our two agencies work really, really close together and really work to maximize our resources to the best of our abilities. And we were discussing when it first started breaking how short of resources we are, and there were no state resources available in the county, none. We called on several events and the response was there are no resources. So I did the first thing that we've ever done in my history that I'm aware of, and we had our Charlie strike team, which is our wildland strike team of 5 engines, was in Southern California at the Lake Fire. I called state OES, I emergency demobbed them, moved them overnight, got them back in Santa Clara County. We worked out an agreement with CAL FIRE to keep them in Santa Clara County. And that was the response force for Santa Clara County. And the perfect example of how thin it was when we had the fire in the Coyote Valley that broke.
Right.
In the middle of all this, there were 8 white county fire engines down at the north end of Morgan Hill and south end of San Jose. So it was pretty thin. That was our Charlie strike team that went down there with 3 other of our engines. And that strike team just got back today. They were, we ran them for 3 weeks straight to provide the coverage, not only at the lake, but here back at home. So on the operational side of the house is one issue, and the effective use and movement of operational resources is critical and key in this county from a local government perspective. And then the fire marshal side, I hope I answered that question for you as well.
Yeah, it might be just in terms of future information, through the chair as we have this item come back in the future and continue to consider it. I think that would be helpful, to take a deeper dive into what can we do in terms of self-help if we advance this plan or a plan like it in terms of not only helping on the prevention side and on the day-to-day management side, but also operate. I mean, it's really all about being prepared for these catastrophic fires at this point. I think, obviously there's some efficiencies perhaps and some money to be saved and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're trying to protect people from fire, and getting a better idea how that, if this happens, how a fire marshal in conjunction with your office might, be able to better integrate that mutual aid. I remember back at the Santana Row fire, Supervisor Chavez and I were both on the council at that time in the city, and there were tremendous strides after that fire, in terms of improving communication between agencies and so forth. And maybe that's what I'm asking for here to start. You brought this forward before these fires, and I'm saying now that we've had the fires, maybe we can, toss that element in as well. Lastly, I know, and I just want to say, because I know there's colleagues from different points of view, I'm not going to go down a path of trying to put consolidation on the table today. That's not per se, anything that we are going to talk about today, as I understand it. Although, as Supervisor Chavez said, that's one of the things that's coming back, working through committees, and I think we'll in the next month and a half we will be talking about it. But I want to understand from the financial side, when you're asking for money and general fund dollars, what prospectively consolidation can do to mitigate the general fund burden of this kind of work, the kind of work in this plan. And I have to, full disclosure, Dr. Smith, Jeff Smith, gave us, a thumbnail sketch of that in our committee meeting just a few days ago, saying that essentially it's a matter of sort of the rich offsetting the poor and the moderate income part of the district kind of holding everything together. But maybe you could just share your view on that very, very quickly before we move on. And I know other members need to speak.
So on the financial side, I will say that Central Fire Protection District is not asking for money. I think the Central Fire Protection District owns a big piece of this and are funding this. The request, and that's why the request was for the County Fire Marshal's office, because really at the core, in order for there to a successful outcome, and that's how I always what does success look like on an effective program, there has to be a unified program and a unified approach. How to best achieve that in terms of structure is really a political question that's best left to the Board of Supervisors. But a unified program is key. At the time when this referral was given to me, the only entity that I could see that would have a reach greater than the Central Fire Protection District is the County Department of the Fire Marshal. And so that's why I was asking that department to be funded. And I know it's a little nuanced, and in a lot of ways, it represents kind of the fire service in this county. It is very broken up in a lot of ways. There are a lot of different agencies in this county and a lot of different programs. And we've gotten a lot better on the operational side of the house with trying to share operational resources. But understand, what we saw in August was exactly what was laid out in the report in terms of there are less mutual aid resources available in the system, 50% less according to state OES, and we saw the impacts of that. And so it really kind of put a fine point on, you need a unified program and a unified approach. Otherwise, it'll be too disjointed, because it needs to be an approach where, in an example, we just talked about the risk in the east side and the risk on the west side and future fires. Well, a community may want a fuel break in their community, but it may make more sense for that fuel break to be in the adjacent community based on topography. Because last I checked, when they were drawing jurisdictions, they didn't put them in perfect topographical alignment to keep wildfire from moving from one jurisdiction to the next. And so that's just an issue and one of the challenges to overcome with multiple programs. And working together, we've tried to make some headway on that, but and the CWPP was an amazing lift for this county, but no agency owns that. The individual jurisdictions are revising and implementing the best they can on an individual basis. So it's a very challenging landscape that we're in right now.
Well, thank you very much. And again, just for today's purposes, just sort of the request for continuing information as we dive into this over the next month and a half is probably stating the obvious, but help us prepare whatever fiscal impact analyses under various scenarios that we need to understand. How does unification help that? How does it not? How does partial unification help it? How does it not? I think it would be helpful for me, as usual, to have multiple choice to select from on the fiscal impact side, as well as just, you know, the more esoteric side of unification or the more operational side of unification. Period. I want to give up the microphone here, but I would be completely remiss if I didn't again ask you to extend a tremendous thank you on behalf of the folks in my district. Again, I doubt that everyone's had a chance to realize this, but every 150 feet in this neighborhood for about 2 square miles, there are thank you firefighter signs, homemade signs attached to trees, on A-frames, put on the back of cars, in driveways, banners across the tops of homes. I'm sure that's the way it is over on Santa Cruz mountainside as well. But I just want to make sure that message gets out, you know, with whatever anxiety people had and possible miscommunications that happened here and there. None of that mitigates at all or reduces at all the tremendous gratitude we have for what all of the firefighters did, including those that came far and wide from, you know, places like Morro Bay and places like that to help us out. So please do extend our gratitude, especially from District 3 here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to see if Supervisor Ellenberg, do you have any comments or questions?
I don't. Happy to listen today.
Supervisor Simidian?
No question.
Chief, I just want to say thank you to you and all the men and women that have put your lives on the line for so long during these enormous fires, both the northern and southwestern part of our county. And my condolences to all the firefighters whose homes were destroyed while they were out protecting other people's homes. And I want to say kudos to you for doing such a great job accessing state funds for so many things to get so much equipment and facilities and services and trucks and all the rest for our county. And if there comes a time when you're not able to get grant or bond money for what you need, I look forward to you coming back to our board and are working out some way to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wasserman. I just wanted to also extend a thanks. I'm going to just make a couple of observations. I think your report was really prescient in a number of ways. And one issue that you raised is that wildfires are a whole new animal, even than perhaps they were prior to climate change. And that the nature of fire is so dramatically different that we're going to have to think very critically about what it looks like to protect, you know, urban centers from wildfires and what it looks like to protect our urban, our grasslands and our, you know, the nature in general and the hillsides. And the second is that I think the other point you raised was that prevention and suppression can't be done one organization at a time, and that the old days of where you can boundary drop during emergencies doesn't really make sense in this new environment, that in fact prevention and suppression really need to be done at a regional level, at a much deeper level. And then the third issue that I want to raise is one that you actually raised, and it was like a couple lines in one of your reports, and you talked about how much more strained mutual aid was going to be, and that you anticipated this exact day that we would call for help and the help wouldn't be there, and that the county had made a practice under your leadership and under Chief Kemna's leadership of really being that mutual aid partner, and that we didn't like to say no, and we rarely did, if ever. But that when the wildfires hit so dramatically here, that there was literally no one to turn to. And it's with that last set of thinking that I just want to say that I do think that we are going to have to think long and hard about this report. I appreciate the update as to what work's been done. I do think that we're going to need to discuss this as part of budget, and I think the point you raised about the role of the fire marshal versus the role of central fire is something that we will have an opportunity to discuss at a future meeting when we look at these consolidation reports. But I just want to underscore that you were right in a bunch of different ways, and that there's still quite a lot of work that needs to be done. I think one of the challenges that you're going to have is deciding, as it relates to the board, what can wait for grants and what can't. And given that we're still in wildfire season, just one request I have of you is, if there's something that you need now, I'm interested in knowing what that is. Given just the date, like literally today, what are we going to need? Because we're at the beginning of fire season. We're not at the end of it.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, we're just starting to hit the peak. Typically, we don't see the level of fire behavior that we've seen in August. We normally don't see that level of fire behavior until September or October. And actually, if you look at the most destructive fires in California, they typically happen in October and fall, September, October. So we are very concerned about that. I think from an operational resource perspective, Central Fire Protection District is good. I don't have an ask for resources at this time. What I'd like to do is, at least for this district, while the other conversations go on, because I know there's a lot to discuss, is get our wildland program manager position filled and really start working on building a solid foundation. Because understand that, we're fortunate in a lot of ways. And thank you for mentioning Chief Kemna, because he started a lot of this work and a lot of really good work in this county. And because of Chief Kemna, Santa Clara County has a seat on the board of directors, and that's currently me in my current role, for FireScope, which sets policy for the state of California. And at that table is the CAL FIRE director, the director for California OES, the large Southern California departments. And so a lot of the discussions in this report have been based on, sitting in those meetings, seeing what we're seeing from a state perspective. And in a lot of ways, Southern California 30 years ago, that was our fire hotspot. But with climate change and with the overabundance of fuel, you've seen over the last 7 years a shift of that fire up into the northern part of California, burning like it used to 30 years ago in Southern California. And we have a lot of great partners to learn from and get best practices from, which is what I tried to do in that report, to say, hey, this is what established best practices look like in programs that have been around for 30 years. And so I look forward to more dialogue on that. I don't have a specific ask of you today, other than to say thank you for asking. I think right now I'm just looking to get my folks a break and hoping for a little lull, because at one time we typically have about 60, 64, I think is the number of personnel on every single day. And at one point we were close to 120. And so that means everybody that's off is working mandatory shifts. And so we're just trying to give them a break right now and hope the weather holds and get the remainder of the SCU complex and the CZU buttoned up and get reset for the next time.
Thank you, Chief. All right, there's no action on that. It was really a briefing for the board and a refresher, and we'll look forward to having more discussions about this in the coming weeks. And so thank you for that. We're now going to turn to item 24, and this is RVs as ADUs. And I'm going to ask the staff if there's anything additional that is not in the report.
We have a presentation.
Well, hey, Jack.
Hi, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You're great. Perfect timing.
Okay, yes, we would like to, I'm hoping you can hear me. I have it up pretty loud.
Yes.
We would like to make a presentation if the board would allow us, please. We have a presentation ready.
Okay, let's go. We're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jacqueline Anshano, Director of Planning and Development. And with me today is Lisa Mikhail, Principal Planner, Michael Meehan, our Senior Planner, and Joanna Wilk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm very sorry. We had one public speaker on the previous item, and I just saw that.
Oh.
And so if I could ask staff, as you set up, if we could have the clerk just call him the single speaker. I'm presuming, Alan, are you for the fire item?
Yes, I would
Okay,
like to speak
please
on
go
the
ahead.
fire item. I think the citizens of the county would like to understand why in 1993 we voted to pass California Proposition 117, which was designated to provide funds for police and fire, and why the county hasn't spent any of the money on fire protection. I think we're entitled to an explanation for that. There's a claim that there's inadequate resources, but $200 million was collected last year for this, and billions have been collected over the last 27 years. I think we also need to understand that the chief is only responsible for a very small portion of the entire county, and other areas of the county need the appropriate fire protection. And only through a cooperative effort will this take place, and only through your action. And so far, there's been no action, and this has been going on for almost 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. All right, Jack, back to you.
Thank you. We are returning to speak to the options for addressing affordable housing in the unincorporated areas of Santa Clara County. And as I said, Michael Meehan, Senior Planner, Lisa Mikhail, Principal Planner, Joanna Wilk, Associate Planner, and we also have Elizabeth Pianca, our Deputy County Counsel. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Michael Meehan. Mr. Meehan.
Thank you, Jack. Everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Michael Meehan, Senior Planner. The subject of this presentation is allowing travel trailers as permanent dwellings in the unincorporated county. For context, this item is in response to a board referral from March 10th of this year, directing the department to prepare options for more broadly allowing certain non-motorized RVs, specifically travel trailers, as ADUs. We'll first cover 2 options for doing so, followed by staff's recommendation and a brief update on the county's ongoing efforts to address affordable housing, concluding with any questions for staff. So option number 1 would allow travel trailers as ADUs countywide with a planning clearance on a permanent basis and with the requirement to site the trailer in the rear yard and to screen the trailer if visible from adjacent properties. This would be accomplished by making a zoning ordinance modification to the land use classification for movable tiny homes. Currently, movable tiny homes as ADUs have design standards that effectively prevent the use of common travel trailers as ADUs. This option is the simplest approach to allowing travel trailers. However, allowing them countywide with a single ministerial planning process could result in significant challenges in both urban and rural areas alike. Option number 2 would allow travel trailers as ADUs only in neighborhoods that had opted in to participate. A neighborhood here meaning a group of 25 or more contiguous parcels could gather signatures and voluntarily opt in to a 5-year pilot program that would allow travel trailers as ADUs in that area. All areas of the unincorporated county would be eligible to gather these signatures and opt in to the pilot. And after the 5-year pilot program, that same contiguous group of parcels would be eligible to continue allowing travel trailers as ADUs in a permanent capacity. Once opted in, the travel trailers would be allowed on a similar basis to option 1 with that planning clearance form in the rear yard and if need be with visual screening. Rather than modifying the movable tiny home land use classification, option number 2 would be accomplished with a new category specifically for travel trailers as ADUs. This option provides an opportunity to empower individual neighborhoods to control their own participation, and doing so with that 5-year introductory pilot phase. However, this option would require significant effort from staff for effective administration and monitoring of this new program. Overall, both options present an opportunity to increase the allowable types of housing in the county, increasing flexibility and possibly resulting in the development of ADUs that are more affordable because installing a travel trailer is less costly than conventional construction. However, both options present significant challenges.
Okay, I was just doing it with you. No, I know.
Both make permanent use of recreational vehicles that were explicitly designed and constructed for limited and temporary use. Both are likely to impact neighborhood character, urban and rural, and to result in significant code enforcement cases. And lastly, allowing travel trailers as ADUs will not guarantee affordability, which could prove to be prohibitively difficult to establish given the costs and logistical burden associated with connecting a travel trailer to sewer, water, and electricity, especially in the rural areas. For these reasons, and significantly, due to the lack of any known expression of public interest in allowing travel trailers as ADUs, staff does not recommend either option 1 or 2. In sum, allowing travel trailers would not result in a new housing unit, only provide an alternative form of an ADU. They could have an impact on neighborhood character. They do not guarantee rental rates that are affordable. And finally, staff does not know them to be a subject of interest to property owners in the county. It's important to note that during staff's outreach for allowing movable tiny homes as ADUs, the San Martin Planning Advisory Committee recommended not allowing the use of travel trailers. If the board supports developing either option, staff will conduct public outreach for the impacted communities, which in this case would be the entirety of the unincorporated area, bringing proposed zoning ordinance amendments first to the San Martin Planning Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission before bringing it back to the board for its final consideration. So my colleague, my colleague Joanna Wilk will now provide an update on all current and near future actions to address affordable housing in the county.
Thank you, Michael, and good evening, members of the board. The department would like to draw the board's attention to existing actions taken by the Office of Supportive Housing and the Planning Department to address the county's affordable housing crisis. First, the Planning Department implemented an inclusionary housing ordinance for residential development and an impact fee for commercial development for the Stanford Community Plan area. This was adopted by the board in September of 2018. Second, the planning department implemented revised accessory dwelling unit regulations, which permitted junior ADUs and movable tiny homes within the unincorporated areas. This was adopted by the board in March of 2020. Third, the planning department is currently evaluating an inclusionary housing ordinance and an in lieu fee for residential development within the unincorporated areas. This is slated to go before the board in October. Next, the planning department is evaluating implementing an affordable housing impact fee for commercial development within the unincorporated areas. Additionally, the planning department is pursuing a zoning ordinance amendment to streamline the creation of agricultural worker housing. Additionally, the Office of Supportive Housing is using a variety of funding sources to subsidize affordable housing development throughout the entire county of Santa Clara. The Office of Supportive Housing is also overseeing the investment of over $100 million to develop affordable and supportive housing. And lastly, the Office of Supportive Housing is coordinating the delivery of supportive services to 1,770 households. They plan to extend these services to an additional 1,360 households once their housing bond is fully implemented. So in addition to these actions, the planning department plans to pursue a working relationship with the city of San Jose to pursue an increase in density and affordable housing within the city's urban service areas. Staff is in communication with the city's planning department and confirmed their receptivity to evaluating affordable housing within these areas. And before the department makes any recommendation, staff will ensure robust public outreach is performed, and staff will collaborate with their respective board offices. So this working partnership is an opportunity for the city to address their own affordable housing needs. It's also an opportunity for both the city and the county to better meet their state of California regional housing needs allocation for the upcoming 2023 and 2031 cycle. Lastly, the city of San Jose is working to preserve areas of Coyote Valley through a general plan update. This preservation can be offset by allowing greater density within the city's urban service areas. So in summary, the department finds that permitting travel trailers is a creative tool to address the affordable housing crisis. However, as Michael outlined, the challenges do outweigh the opportunities, and the county is already implementing or pursuing a variety of different actions to address the housing crisis. So this concludes the department's presentation, and the following staff members are available if the board has questions. Thank you.
You know, I'm gonna turn to Dave because this was in response to something he raised. I do just want to say, I think, I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I think we're pretty aware of what the housing department is doing. And I think with the exception of the last little bit that you raised about, you know, partnering with the city of San Jose was helpful, but I think recognizing all of that, we're still looking for answers in terms of how do we expand and how do we move faster. And I'm mostly saying that because I don't think there's a lack of clarity that there's a lot we're already doing. I think the question really is, what more can we do? But I do appreciate the staff report overall. I just wanted to make that statement before anybody else did. I'm going to turn to Dave because I know this was Supervisor Cortese, something that you requested, and to get your thoughts.
Just to revisit quickly as I can, so what I had asked for originally at Hewlett, when I was a member of Hewlett, this is just to put in perspective how long this referral goes back, was for the planning department to inventory an area roughly, when I say inventory, I mean map a residential area that was roughly bound by White Road, McKee Road, Penitentiary Creek, and Toyon Avenue in my district. And please come back and let us know based on current use of non-motorized RVs in the area that might be grandfathered in, number one. And number two, potential for additional RV temporary quarters in that area based on lot sizes and setback areas, to come back and report on whether or not a pilot just in that area would be worth considering in order to mitigate homelessness, not to create a new type of affordable housing, being an RV trailer, which is really a little annoying, honestly, to have this report come back and say RV trailers are not, an appropriate kind of affordable housing. Tents aren't an appropriate kind of affordable housing. Underpasses and sleeping bags aren't an affordable type of, an appropriate type of affordable housing. Living on a sidewalk is not an appropriate type of affordable housing. We have homeless folks up and down the Elm Rock Trail, walking up and down, sleeping in bushes. I don't think that's an appropriate type of affordable housing. And as to the issue of there's no known desire to do this, I guess I would pose what's probably a rhetorical question is, when was that outreach done? When did that community meeting occur? When did those discussions occur? And did the mapping and the outreach that I asked for a couple of years ago when I was on Hewlett ever occur in the very specific pilot area I was proposing? So, that's why today, when Supervisor Chavez suggested on the consent calendar that we just take that body of work, so to speak, and put it over in the housing task force and homeless housing task force to look at whether or not this is a way on a temporary basis in a pilot program to shelter folks who are currently completely and totally without shelter, that they might come up with some suggestions in the task force. Do it, don't do it, or maybe try it for a year, or maybe it should only be in certain areas. I would say, even if there was going to be some consideration by this board of option 2, to say that a continuous group of 25 property owners petition the department to participate in an overlay zone is really an egregious hurdle for people. In a community of 25 folks, you'd basically be saying that if every single lot out of 25 did not petition and agree, that even 24 out of 25 would be a veto. So those are the kind of things a task force could kick around and say, hey, if we did do this, what should be the threshold of community consent or participation? I don't think we can work that out here today, even if there was interest. I suspect because my district, especially the perimeter and unincorporated areas of my district, are relatively unique compared to some of the other supervisorial districts. A little bit similar to Supervisor Wasserman's, but still unique in terms of the suburban rural interface, in terms of some of the almost ancient housing stock that's out there on very large lots, in terms of the lack of code enforcement in my district. For the entire time I've been on the Board of Supervisors, I'm not asking you to go out and tell people to remove the current RV trailers that people are living in. It would be in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of occupants, and I don't want to displace people. So I'm not asking for code enforcement, but to say it's an unallowable type of temporary dwelling unit and then have people out and then have no code enforcement as to the codes that currently exist, it's just, to me, a form of dysfunction, and with a DYS, dysfunction. It's like the right hand is saying one thing, this is our code, and the left hand saying, but we're not gonna do anything about it. So, from a county supervisor standpoint, it puts me in an awkward situation, because if I tell somebody, the planning department, the building department does not enforce these requirements, I'm complicit in violating the law. If I tell people there's a way for you to petition to set up a pilot program in your neighborhood, that feels a little bit better. But I don't think we can craft that ourselves as a county board of supervisors on the latest at the 5:30 hour, 5:40 hour here on a Tuesday. So I'm just disappointed. I would suggest that if any of this is going to move forward, for example, option one, or if nothing's going to move forward on this today, and I'm not going to make a motion one way or the other, but I would still request a referral of option two as a starting point to the Housing Task Force, which is what I think Supervisor Chavez was trying to do earlier on the consent calendar. Just simply refer option two to the Housing Task Force and let them work on it quickly and see if there's anything they can come up with that makes any sense.
That's a motion. Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any more discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Supervisor Ellenberg.
Yes.
Supervisor Simidian.
Simidian, aye.
Supervisor Cortese.
Aye.
Vice President Wasserman.
Yes.
And President Chavez.
Yes. Thank you. That passes unanimously. We're going to go to our last item. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go to our last item, and that is item, I think this is our last item. Michael, tell me if it is. This is the playground grants.
26.
Thank you. And Supervisor Simidian, you asked for this to come back to us, and we'll
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. There is a staff recommendation which has been supplemented by a Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors addendum to legislative file dated August 28th from Don Rocha, subject to all-inclusive playground grant program delegation of authority. And what that document does is it defines and refines the limits of the delegation of authority. And if people have that and are comfortable with it, I'm prepared to move approval of the item consistent with this document.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any comments on this item?
No public comments at this time.
Thank you. From my colleagues, I'll start with Supervisor Cortese. Any comments?
None, thank you.
Supervisor Ellenberg?
No comments.
All right, Supervisor Simidian and Wasserman, I think you're both good. I just wanted to, one, thank Joe for pushing a little bit. And here's the thing I would just request of the staff. I would like, one, I'm going to reinforce that you check in with the board offices, but two, I just think it's better if we're not super euphemistic, because in it says there's this group is thinking about this or that. It would just be good to say who, so we're not wondering, do we need to go talk to our cities and figure this all out? So just a request for transparency where we can do that. So we have a motion and we have a second, and seeing no more discussion on the motion, I'm going to ask for a roll call vote.
Supervisor Ellenberg.
Yes.
Supervisor Simidian.
Joe, you're on mute.
Simidian, aye. Thank you.
Supervisor Cortese.
Aye.
Vice President Wasserman.
Aye.
President Chavez.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. This was a lot that went into today. I want to thank all of our staff very much for all the work they did. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 22nd as our next meeting. Be safe, be careful, wear your masks, wash your hands, and I'll see you all soon.
Please stand by for the ordinance record list report coming momentarily. Thank you. This is the ordinance list report for the Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, September 1st, 2020. Item number 39, introduction and preliminary adoption of salary ordinance number NS-5.21.19, amending Santa Clara County salary ordinance number NS-5.21, relating to compensation of employees, adding one unclassified IT field support specialist or associate IT field support specialist position in the Technology Services and Solutions Department. Position shall expire at 11:59 p.m. on April 3rd, 2022. This concludes the ordinance record list report for the Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, September 1st, 2020.
This concludes